There isn't one thing that they would ask someone else to do that they wouldn't do themselves or haven't done themselves before in the past.
This is Entrepreneurs the Playbook, where I give you access each week to the world's greatest athletes and executives about their personal and professional playbook and what has made them champions on and off the field. This is the Playbook. This is Dave Meltzer, CEO of Sports One Marketing, and I'm here with Entrepreneur the Playbook. And I have to tell you, I'm really excited to be here with Reggie Love. You were introduced to me through Zach Leonsis.
It's a good friend.
Yeah, but he mentioned your name, and I said, oh my gosh, that's the guy I want to have on the Playbook, because I only knew tidbits of the story. And for those who don't know about you, Reg, if you want to just give a few minutes of background, your own brief soliloquy of your successes of where and what you've done.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me today, Dave. I appreciate you taking the time to be here and to spend the time with me. Look, I can't say that I've had a bunch of successes. I think I've been on a bunch of very good teams, and I think that's really sort of been part of what's sort of kept me on a pretty decent trajectory to date. I was a football player growing up and got a scholarship to Duke. In football, we didn't win a bunch. We, lost more than we won for 4 years.
You had a good streak there, did you? Like 22 losses?
Yeah, we did. And, and I was lucky enough to have a chance to walk on to a basketball team that was coached by Coach K in my freshman year. Shane Battier, obviously, NBA champion and, multiple time player of the year and defensive player of the year in college, and just sort of a great role model and teammate. I was lucky enough to sort of to be close to that and to learn from that, and to figure out that, look, there's a lot to be had from being on really good teams, even if you're not sort of the main guy. And I would argue too that, from playing Duke football, I think I learned so much about myself and so much about my teammates in terms of, it's easy to show up and play hard and be excited about what you're doing when you're winning and everybody's telling you you're good and you're great and you're funny and you're tall and you're good looking. When it's the converse of that, and like people are telling you, look, you're
Dave Meltzer. You're not tall, you're not good looking. I am funny, at least some people tell me that, but go ahead. Not even in my life, this is good.
So I think so for that to have happened, to have that juxtaposition at a young age, I think was really helpful in sort of understanding like what it actually takes to be resilient. And I think resiliency for me has been the thing that has allowed me to be a part of really good organizations and be on really good teams where, you're not the main guy. You're kind of the guy that's like, setting the screen, diving on a loose ball, finding lunch or grabbing water or carrying luggage or, whatever that sort of small integral part is. And I think over time, even though everyone's roles are different, the relationships and the connectivity that you build from being on a part of a team, I think is, it's not comparable to anything else.
And it's interesting because I come from that same background where my goal was to make the team. Right, which is different, right?
Yeah.
I ran the most notable sports agency, so most of the guys that I represent, I market the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Most of those guys, it wasn't making the team they were thinking about. There's a certain property of these great athletes that they're, what school am I going to get a scholarship to? And this could happen as early as the 8th grade.
Yeah, even earlier sometimes these days,
Yeah, and it's, when you're 5'7" and 147 pounds, it's, am I going to make the team?
Yeah.
Right, at every level. But as you know, you talk about persistence and you talk about consistency. There's these characteristics that come out to someone that almost overachieves by making the best teams.
Yeah.
And you've been on the best team, and you utilized radical humility to really not mention the biggest team you're on. Because it's my hero. I went to Occidental College.
And
Yeah.
we had some real notable graduates at Occidental, as you probably know, right? Jack Kemp, Jim Mora.
Of course, some great
Terry
guys.
Gilliam, Dave Meltzer, but Vance Mueller. But President Obama went there for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest team you've been on, right?
Yeah, look, and I always say too, like, I started working for Barack Obama when he was a junior senator from Illinois. And the idea of him, like, even being president seemed to be, a possibility maybe in, like, 2022 or 2020, like some, like, far off, distant time in the future. And so, and I think the sociological experiment of a guy named Barack Hussein Obama running for president, building an organization, a national organization from scratch, raising money from all across the U.S., and, essentially having an election where you had the highest participation rate of voters that we'd had in the history of our country. That in itself, I think, is just one of the best experiences I could have ever had, because ultimately you're on a team in which you're putting everything on its head, and the guy who's running the show is a guy who, either you really, really believe that this thing is possible or you don't. And for me personally, I think there's something amazing about being a part of something that makes you hopeful.
Yeah,
and about being a part of something that's a little bit different, that's a little outside of the box, that has the best intentions for the most amount of people at heart. It's like one of those things where, it's like you have your cake and eat it too. And in most scenarios, you just don't get it. And I think that's part of the reason why a guy like Barack Obama was able to attract so many people from so many different sectors to come and be a part of his team. I was actually talking with a friend the other day. One of the co-founders of Facebook left Facebook to come and, like, be like our social media, digital media expert, right?
Yeah.
For basically pennies on the dollar, right? And that's special.
What do you think? I've learned, and I coach people to always have mentors. Surround yourself with the right people and the right ideas, and eventually it actually elevates, I believe, your own vibration or your own enlightenment when you surround yourself with extraordinary people like President Obama, like the founders of Facebook, like others that were in your organization, like Coach K, who I also been blessed to be around. And he vibrates at a different speed, right? And you're bound to pick up things that then, as you left the White House, you then go ahead and go to Wharton Business School, the best of all. And I would have loved, help out with admissions to my college and my law school. I'd have loved to see a recommendation letter. Because, people joke around, they're like, oh my God, Dave Meltzer and Warren Moon wrote you, you're at these colleges. How can you imagine? Wait, who is this? Right? You go right to the top.
It definitely helps.
Did he actually write you a recommendation letter to the president?
He did.
That
I did have a letter of
cool.
recommendation from the president for me to go to business school.
That is really cool.
It definitely. Well, if you saw my if you saw my scores on the GMAT, I needed a good letter of recommendation.
That's all right, man. It's not what you do.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, but yeah, I do think, you're spot on that if you surround yourself with really good people, that it does. But I think it takes a certain level of confidence, right? You've got to have somebody that's okay not being the smartest guy on everything in the room.
Right.
And if you're okay saying, look, you know what, I may not know the most here, but I'm happy to learn about it. I'm happy to try to get as smart as I can on it. But ultimately, I want to be around people who are really smart and are really open-minded about different topics. And that's everything from, the financial stability of the economy to foreign policy to even to your operations of personnel, who you're hiring, where you're going to get, talent at the senior level, at the middle management level, and at the early stage level. And I think that's a hard thing to do because, especially in the sports world, we're always told that we need to project strength and that we are, the alpha male, and that we can, if we persist, we will get it done, But, sometimes it's okay to say, look, you know what, I don't have all the answers today, but I'm going to work on it.
So you and I have this in common, right? We're kind of that guy's guy, right? When it was always Leigh Steinberg's, that's Leigh Steinberg's guy, or that's
Right.
Warren Moon's partner.
Right.
Until I started this internet thing of building my own brand, I don't think anyone knew my first name, let alone my last name. I did get, hey, the short Jewish guy, and you were the chief of stuff.
Yeah. You're that guy that plays basketball with Obama, or you're the guy that runs Secret Service for Obama. And you're like, yeah, whatever, it's all
You're the
good.
guy that went to Duke. You played right with these guys. And you won a national championship. I got to play a little bit. I think Boozer got hurt, right?
Yeah, he did.
I'm a huge Duke fan, especially after I met Coach K.
Thank you, man.
And if I, the schools that is top of top. So I have a question though, because what personality trait, if you look at exceptional beings, and I'm going to take two that I love, Coach K and President Obama, what personality traits do they have that you see in all great men and women that you meet?
Yeah, look, I think that is definitely one of the unique perspectives I've been able to have, right? Where, I've sort of worked for or worked with these two guys who basically are been at the top of the game of what they do. Now, I always joke because, I would say that in the world of Duke basketball, it's not a democracy. There's no Congress, there's no Senate. Right. There's just there is the Duke way, and that's the way. And so, I think that Barack Obama, has been very good at bringing people together to, that have different points of views, different angles, different needs, and sort of making people feel good about not getting everything that they want, true diplomacy, and obviously you see less and less of that, here in our current state of the political environment. But when you look at where Barack Obama and Mike Krzyzewski overlap, I honestly think one of the biggest things, and I think it's also one of the biggest things for me, is that, both of those guys, they basically, there isn't one thing that they would ask someone else to do that they wouldn't do themselves or haven't done themselves before in the past, And so whether or not that's go knock on a door on a Saturday afternoon for 5 hours, or take a charge in the middle of the paint against a guy who's, 6'10", 250 pounds, it's their leadership comes from their ability to understand the perspective of what it is they need everyone on the team to do in order to be successful. And they work tirelessly. They are the guys who, they're up all night watching tape, reading briefings, making phone calls, doing whatever it is they need to do in order to be prepared to have whatever edge they can have for the next day at work. And I remember the day that...
You're not playing golf all the time.
Look, man.
Those rumors aren't true. Told you.
Yeah, well, look, I would say that, if you were to make just some sort of hypothetical comparisons to 44 and 40, the 44th president and the 43rd president, the 44th president spent less time on the golf course than days spent at the ranch in Texas. But that's just
Yeah, I get it. Interesting, because I'm looking at one thing, and most people wonder behind the scenes. I've never met President Obama. I did get to share a lot of time with Coach K, and I believe that certain people vibrate faster. But the thing that seems to me that those are two really good people. They seem to do good in the simplest forms of being people. They're extremely intelligent. They're like, the one trait that I have that they had was, I can outwork you. And I got the sense from Coach K, and I get it from Obama, that look, I may not be the most intelligent, but I am a tireless worker. I will, and that's how I made the teams that I made. That's how I got to play in college and do the things that I did. Was I just stayed steady. But they also, beyond this work ethic, they just seem like good people. Give me some insight on that type of character, because I think it goes, underestimated that, hey, good guys win. And they seem like two good guys that are real winners.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that, one, I think they both have, a motor, right? And I think, especially Coach K, right? I mean, the guy played basketball at a competitive level and not, a big guy, not the fastest guy. The same for Barack Obama, played basketball, wasn't the biggest, wasn't the fastest. But in terms of how they are as human beings, I think when I really think back about it, there are two things about Barack Obama that really sort of highlight that for me. And then I think the one thing about Coach K that highlights it for me, and I'll start with that, is that Coach K really, cares about the development of the kids that come to the program. Coach K has this thing every year called K Academy, and he brings back former players, and the former players are coaching, campers that are 35 years and older that are coming for this fantasy experience. And so I have like a level of connectivity with guys that I never played with, because Coach K has been there for so long. Same university, same job, same title, hasn't gone to the league, hasn't switched schools, and I think ultimately he cares about the brand of the university, and he cares about the development of the kids that come through the program who are now men, and some of them are young men, or some of them are still kids. But when grandparents, right? But when you look at that, when you look at the type of young men that have turned into such a wide range of everything from analysts to coaches to hedge fund managers to venture capitalists, like there's just such a large range of guys that are not necessarily where they are today only because of Coach K, but have had that influence on their own individual development as young men. I think that's like, and I think it's easy as a coach to be caught up in just your wins, you know, and because ultimately people get paid for wins.
Yeah, the one and done thing, I could see it on his face. It was like it almost killed him that he had to put up with it, because his ultimate vision was to mature a legacy that was far beyond just you going to the NBA.
Right.
But he also knows a brand needs to win, and in the reality of today, he has to allow some.
It's the biggest conundrum to have.
Yeah.
If you don't recruit them, you're just going to play against them twice or 3 or 4 times a year, because they're in the marketplace.
And then you lose your credibility. Now, what about Obama as a good person?
Yeah, and I think, and I actually would say less about him as a president. Not that he was not, a nice guy as a president, but I think, there were 2 really impressive things that I always thought about him. One was like how he looked at like being a father. I would always say that he was like a father first and president second.
Cool.
He was the guy that was like, look, I'm going to be home for dinner. I'm going to go to the rec league games. I'm going to coach the teams. Like, I'm going to do all these things. You actually should check this out. There's a great picture in Pete Souza's book of him coaching Sasha's team. The head coach had to be away because something came up, and he would go to the practices because he was like, look, I want my kids to be developed and I want to spend the time with them. And so, we always laugh. There's nothing more satisfying than seeing like 9-year-olds run the pick and roll. It's like really, really satisfying.
That's cool.
And I would say, how he always put family and professional development in front of his own needs as a boss. Oftentimes you're dealing with people who are leaving to go to get their MBAs or to law school or going to another job. And, and sometimes you can leave an organization and a person be like, I can't believe you're leaving me.
Yeah,
this is like terrible for me.
That's not my goal. I get that. I love that.
And he would always say, look, I understand that. I think that will be really good for you. And I think he truly believes that, like, if the people from his team and people from his world do well today, that ultimately his brand and his team does well in the long run.
What's the best piece of advice? I get this about Leigh and Warren and other mentors I've had, but what's the best piece of advice President Obama gave you?
I would say he's given me some really good advice over the years. And I think the place where he probably changed my mind in the sense of, because when you're in your mid-20s, you don't really think about what happens in the end, for you, for your parents, for your siblings. And, and I was like really upset with my mom about like tickets for like the inauguration and, and he said, and it was the day after the inauguration, first day in the White House. And he says to me, he goes by and he goes, I didn't see your parents. I saw a bunch of people in the last like 2 days, but I didn't see your parents. Did they come? And I was like, yeah, no, my parents are here. They're here. And he goes, I would love to just, say hello to them and say thanks for you. And I had said to him, I don't know, man. My mom and I, we're in a fight right now, like really like in a fight. And he goes, yeah, but he said, still haven't come by. And I said, sir, I was like, this is going to make it really, I'm just not going to fight my parents because I'm trying to work. We're in a thing, and like I just want to. And he says, well, look, I'm the president of the United States, and I want to see your parents. So you're gonna invite your parents over here because I want to say hello to them. and so I did, and he says to me, after they come, and he's like really nice to them, and Michelle says hello to him, and there's this great photo of of them in the Oval Office, and he goes, that wasn't so hard, was it? And I was like, no, it wasn't. He goes, look, he said, my mother's not here, and, I would do anything to be able to have, another moment with her. And he says, you're probably too young to understand that this thing doesn't always go as long as you think it's going to go. And so it has helped me sort of understand that, my parents are young. They're like, at that point in time, they were up, I think they were 60 or late 50s.
Thank you, man. That's young. And, that's good. I'm 50, so.
And so that has like always given me the perspective to like appreciate and enjoy every day with your friends and with your family, because ultimately, even when you're mad, even when things going crazy, it's just, look, it's not that bad.
Yeah. I love that. And I believe there's a philosophy of getting to center, and a lot of people react. Could be the difference between administrations right now. Some people don't think and react, and there's these 7 breaths of Buddha that allow you, when you're in an argument with your mom or whatever it is, the first step that I see people like President Obama, even Coach K, they take a step back to center.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Before they react. And,
right.
And I've, later on in my life, took on that strategy. As we come to a close, I love the legacy of President Obama, but you've done extraordinarily well for a guy that's just a team player. You're like the 6th man in life, which I love, and you have a great job. Great organization, a great team with Transatlantic, and I know the organization well. I manage $8 billion or something in money, but you help people. Right, it is a socially conscious company, and around the world, not just in the United States. But you're still young. You have this extraordinary background. You meet influential people, and you influence influential people. What legacy do you want to leave when it's all said and done?
Yeah, I think that, I think there's 2 things that are really important to me, and I think mainly is I moved to D.C. I was 22 years old. I didn't know anyone. There was no book. There was no manual. And so I kind of just like stumbled through a lot of it, and I think I got really lucky in some of these stumbles and whatever. But ultimately, I always say that like my door is like always open. Like I will spend half an hour, 30 minutes, 20 minutes with anybody, because I always think that.
Thank goodness, that's why you're here. I got him on my podcast. He's a man of his word.
But no, because like I can remember the few people who were kind enough to me to give me 10 minutes or give me 30 minutes to give me their thoughts and their advice. not to say that I know everything, but sometimes just to hear another perspective from someone else who's had a journey, like, I have had great parents, but, I'm like the first kid in my family to play college sports, the first kid in my family to live in DC and to work in politics and to go get their MBA. And so, I've often had to lean on people that weren't inside, the Love household to get a perspective or to get help or guidance on things. And so I think that's like one thing, the saying is, if you take the elevator of success up, don't forget to send it back down for someone else. And so like, I'm like a big believer in that. And, and I think, my parents they've been together for, almost 45 years, and they've been great spouses to one another and great parents. And, I think that is sort of, I think that's my biggest challenge, to be as good of a spouse and a good husband and a good father, the way my parents were.
Nice.
And so like, I think if I can do that, I think everything else will kind of take care of itself.
I love that. Well, that's my favorite question of the playbook, and I think you have a legacy of productivity and accessibility, and beyond trying to live up to what I think is a major accomplishment for anyone, staying happily married and supportive of your family after 40-some years. I've been doing it 20, but it's been more one-sided. It's all my wife and her patience and understanding.
Hey, look, you're halfway there, man. Congrats,
Well, when you have a blind and deaf wife, it's easy to stay married. I'm a smart guy. I look for my strengths. Anyway, what a pleasure to have you on. We'll have to do this again. I definitely want to.
40-year anniversary.
That's right. Well, no, before that, man. We're going to a Laker game. I'm sitting in courtside. I want to learn about the inside scoop of basketball next.
All right, let's do it.
I always wanted to be the commissioner, but I'm here with Reggie Love. This is Dave Meltzer with Entrepreneur, the Playbook.